see sex as infinite. It's expansive. It's like the universe. It's huge. You can't nail it down. It's a mysterious aspect of who we are as humans. And it's a core aspect of who we are. There are many health benefits to being sexual. There's benefits to us physically in terms of our circulation and heart and immune system and ability to relax, and emotional benefits in terms of positive moods, self-esteem, and self-confidence. Our sexuality has to do with how we feel about our gender, our sexual orientation, our bodies, our special parts of our bodies, our ability to connect with someone else and share sexual pleasure with them. It's huge, and our roles in society. One of the things that I feel that when sex is working well for people, they feel that their lives are expanding and they're connecting better. They're connecting well. There's no arguing it is one of the most powerful of human drives and experiences. It's mysterious and a magical energy. But depending on the circumstances and conditions, it can be ecstatically life-giving and affirming, or destructive and saddening. But that has to do with what conditions it's expressed in. I'll share, how I got into this a little bit. I grew up in a upper middle class Jewish family in Bethesda, Maryland. My father worked for the government. And he was the main nurturer. Well, there were 3 other children in the family. I'm the second. And so when you had questions about sex, you actually went to Dad for answers. Mom just wasn't quite as warm and nurturing about things or accepting. But so I asked him, I said, well, what is sex? And I think, maybe in my early teens or late, around 10 or 12. And he said, well, the woman lies on her back and she puts her arms and legs up in the air and the man gets on top of her. And so this is what I pictured. A dead bug. In my family, we joked a lot about sex, and in fact, my older sister Jane and I would tease my father when we were teenagers. She's just a couple years older. We'd come home, and my dad would say, "Well, how are you girls?" And would say, "Fine, Dad, we're pregnant." It was funny. He nearly had a heart attack. And I was brought up in the time of the coming out of the pill. I was born in 1950, so it was in 1964 when the pill came out for the first time. And that changed things a lot because it was the same time as the British invasion of the Beatles, to give you a little context there. And now they were singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and nowadays that would seem so innocent. I think the guys, actually a lot of the guys back then, that's kind of all they wanted to do, or all they thought they could do, in heterosexual relationships. The pill opened the possibility of women being sexually freed up and able to enjoy sex for pleasure. It reduced the fear of unwanted pregnancy. And I have always liked the words of Margaret Sanger, who said, "Never be afraid of passion. If you're strongly sexed, you're richly endowed." Wow. She was the person who helped develop the birth control pill. My generation was the make love not war generation. My sort of coming of age sexually paralleled the sexual revolution. And there was a lot of uncharted territory. We had the pill, AIDS hadn't happened yet, and it was kind of a sexual free-for-all in some ways. There weren't a lot of rules. There were a lot of mixed messages. I had role models from Gloria Steinem to Marilyn Monroe. I, like many of my peers that I later found out, my female peers, I experienced sexual abuse and harm, but in a lot of ways didn't identify it as such, because I did a lot of blaming of myself. But then later on, in talking with other women, finding out, and later with other men, finding out they had experienced some similar things. I call myself a patchwork survivor because I experienced some covert incest by an older male relative, not my father, but and then also that I didn't talk about at all, and then also a date rape in college. And I was attacked once on a pathway at the University of Colorado by a guy who came out from some bushes, and it was an attempted rape. But I hit him with the book I was carrying at the time, which is Gandhi's Last Truth, a book on nonviolence. And I yelled, "You're sick, you're sick, you're sick." But that really didn't get him away. It wasn't until some other people got on the path that he ran away, thank goodness. When things didn't work out in my first love relationship, I ended up charging into a time in my life that was where I was very sexually indiscriminate and promiscuous, and turning to sex as a drug. And it's not a time I'm proud of. I used to say if I had a notch in my belt for every guy I slept with, I wouldn't have a belt. And I did get out. That led to, I felt bad. I got into therapy, and I remember heaving into trash baskets, thinking about some of the stuff I had gotten into. I didn't feel so much that I had been exploited in that experience, but the whole thing felt bad because I felt I had actually exploited and was pretty cold to a lot of the people I related with. I ended up having a year of celibacy and getting into sort of spiritual pursuits, and that was very, very helpful for me. I also became the director of the Berkeley Women's Center, and also participated in the Berkeley Women's Health Collective, where we learned how to do our own using speculums, our own pelvic exams on each other. It was pretty amazing. I mean, that's sexual freedom in a way. You don't hear about that kind of sexual freedom now among the young women. I participated in Take Back the Night marches. Books like Our Bodies Ourselves were my Bibles, and it was actually a pretty exciting time, the idea of just really opening up with women's sexuality as something that actually belonged to us as females, and we knew more about than males or doctors. I ended up becoming a counselor for pre-delinquent teenagers, and we tried a lot of things with this population: family therapy, drug addiction, education to how to prevent that and work on that. But it wasn't until we did a unit on sex education that the change started to happen. And this really impressed me. Oh my goodness, just talking about sex openly and directly with these kids really improve them. Like the girls, I remember in this population, when it came time we had an exercise of drawing a picture of the male body. All the pictures the males had erections. I don't think they had seen a nude male body without one. It was pretty telling. That's when I started hearing about sexual abuse, and really serious child sexual abuse that a lot of these kids had experienced, and that was related to their behavior, of course. I began to identify some really important factors in healthy sexual development. Things like, this is like the ideal, to grow up where in a family where there's love and respect modeled and towards the children, where there's progressive sexual learning. And what I mean by that is that person's sexuality is allowed to unfold slowly in steps that are age appropriate. And then in stages where the young person feels in control of what's happening. Conditions, the CERTS conditions, consent, equality, respect, trust, safety, present in the experiences. And where there's conditioning to a full body sexual pleasure without shame. Boy, wouldn't it be great if we all had that. Where there's the safety and permission to talk about sex and sexual issues and to bring up sexual concerns. Where there's access to accurate, comprehensive sex education materials. Where there's knowledge of dangers and how to avoid them. Where you have the education about relationship building and intimacy skills, how to begin to talk to someone else you're sexually interested in when you get of age to engage in sex, and how to see sexual pleasure as a positive actual human right. And skills to be able to control sexual behavior in the sense of calm it down and not have to engage even if the feelings are there. I often have talked with clients, this is goofy, I'm sort of goofy, I'm whatever, but you always use metaphors in practice. People ask me about sex, and I often use food analogies, but one of the food analogies is an ice cream cone. It's like the ice cream, this wonderful ice cream, but it needs a cone or a container to hold it. And that cone or container are the conditions, the consent, equality, respect, trust, safety, and the what's age-appropriate learning, things like this. And without that, your ice cream can drop on a hot pavement and melt, You can't enjoy it. I ended up going into the field of sex therapy. I was enthralled with this budding field. There was so much in terms of coming out of the work of Masters and Johnson, and I started helping women who were having difficulty with becoming orgasmic and running a pre-orgasmic program that Lonnie Barbach had developed at the University of California, San Francisco. I could see how, as women and men overcame sexual functioning problems, they started to feel more confident, more assertive in the world, and it was like the best thing. I was so impressed with how relatively you could make huge changes in a relatively short period of time with sex therapy interventions. I became committed to helping people overcome unnecessary shame, secrecy, and silence. I am a person who is passionate about, I dislike unfairness, and it seemed unfair to me that because of shame and secrecy and silence, people couldn't enjoy their sexuality. As I got into the field, it opened up a lot of learning for me about sex. It's such a fascinating area. There's anthropological aspects, physical aspects, emotional, relationship, and spiritual aspects. Our bodies are spectacular. This is a picture of the female clitoris in cross-section. It actually looks kind of like an old-fashioned clothespin. It has two legs on it. And inside there's what's called a curura, which is this V, it's kind of V-shaped. The head is the point of it, And in male bodies, you have a curura too, and there's two. It also splits off down the penis on each side. The male and females are biological homologs to each other sexually. So before 8 weeks in development, we're the same. And what would become a clitoris in the female, when there's a Y chromosome, it triggers it to develop, for the males, it triggers it to develop into a kind of external version of the clitoris that protrudes from the body. And, but the tissues are the same. I mean, that's why they can do the sex changes, because a lot of the tissues are the same and the functioning is similar. So much for the idea of females coming from Adam's rib, right? It's kind of more the other way around. At the tip of that clitoral head and the tip of the penis, also you have, there are 8,000 sensitive nerve endings called end bulbs, which, pick up sensations. But it's in the cortex of the brain, which there's actually a larger area in your brain for picking up sexual feeling than there is in your genitals. I also learned about things like the importance of stimulation to the clitoris during sex for the female to have an orgasm. Over 70% of females need direct stimulation during sexual interaction to climax. The idea of what I call the look mom, no hands orgasm only happens in less than 30% of the time. Now, you don't see this in porn, right, where there's a focus on stimulation for the female during sex. For males, I was fascinated finding out that it's the underside of the penis towards the sort of mushroom cap tip, the glans area of the penis, that is the most sensitive, and it's called the frenulum. And that's good information too, right, in terms of experiencing sexual pleasure. And I was also fascinated with learning that the male erection and ejaculation, that they're actually 3 different processes: erection, emission, ejaculation, which are kind of separate processes. That's why sometimes men who can't get an erection for organic or other reasons can still have an orgasm and ejaculate. The orgasm, actually the feelings of the orgasm, is more what happens in the brain. It does involve contractions in both the male and the female of the pelvic floor muscles, which are kind of like a hammock with sphincter openings around the anus and around the base of the penis, or the vagina and urethra for the female. And it's this pelvic floor, sort of picture a shoe sole, that goes into spasms at 0.8 of a second interval in both males and females during orgasm. You can have one strong one or several ones. There were lots of similarities and differences too that come up when you look at the sexual response cycle. Now that is the different stages. If you have arousal over time, you can see it moves. There's another stage. This is Masters and Johnson's, but there's been added a desire phase before excitement, and then you can see how orgasm, you have a plateau or a high level of arousal with orgasm, and then a resolution phase. And but if you look at that, this is something that happens in nature. Like a flower opens up to full bloom, releases its scent, and the petals fall off. A storm builds up in the clouds, and the moisture builds, and then it finally rains. It's like a wave crests on the ocean, and and then recedes. this kind of, we go through our life starting when we're young, our bodies kind of peak at 25, or whatever, and then we recede, And it's like this is part of being alive, this process of climax, of building. And I always think this reminds me of the ride at Splash Mountain in Splash Mountain ride at Disneyland. You meander up and then you spill over the top with your hands in the air. Rosemary Basson has come up with I've got so much to cover. Let's see. Rosemary Basson has come up with a view of the sexual response cycle where it's more circular, and you have things like emotions and relationship aspects and sensory aspects coming in and contributing, and psychological, biological. You can start with some spontaneous sex drive, but maybe not. Maybe it starts from some other feelings. And what happens is that the circular view, which I think also does apply to can apply to male, does apply to male. How you end a sexual experience can kind of be the beginning of the next one. So if you have a partner who rolls over after having an orgasm and falls asleep, it doesn't really make you go, gee, I can't wait to do this again, But if you're at the end of sex, you got a sexual interaction, you have a sense that you, like, that was fun, I'd like to, that you have that sense of more closeness, more connection. And if it's a person with themselves, then a sense of just general relaxation and positive feelings about themselves and the miracle of what their body can do. It can fuel and lead to positive experiences coming up. This is a picture of this SARD Guide for a Better Life. I didn't look at what the copyright was, but this is, you can see how worn it is. I used this so much when I was working as a sex therapist because it had a page for each of those sexual response cycle, and this one is on the excitement. But what's really neat here is, if you can see on the female body, this is a cross section. Here's the vagina. The vagina actually, in the excitement phase, it has what's called a ballooning and a tenting effect, and the uterus lifts up and out of the way to make room for penetration. Isn't that fascinating? Not only does it lubricate, but it also does this. But it takes time for this to happen, and the female has to feel ready. Probably one of the main things that I heard over and over again from females, the complaint is they needed their partners to slow down. This is also why rape is very painful and upsetting, because their body is not prepared, and sex with for a child as well. We can see how I also learned a lot about reproduction as a sex therapist. And now I'm going to be sharing with you my fascination for microphotography and photomyography. This is a microphotography picture of the sperm being produced in the seminiferous tubules. Don't they look cool? I mean, look at that. Isn't that fascinating? There are 180 million sperm in a normal ejaculate. Wow! That's an awful lot. Now, if you look at the egg being released from the ovary, it's pretty neat looking there. I mean, it's like the universe comes about, and you have this inner space, and then you have this outer space, and sometimes the very inner space looks like the very outer space. It's like an infinity thing. Okay, that's my spiritual view of life. These microscopic views really can expand the images and associations we have with sex. So if somebody is raised on a lot of porn, let's say, they might, and you say they think of sex, are they going to think of these images of, these images give them alternative ways, if you can expand the knowledge of sexuality, you can help someone to free up from a very limited perspectives. There was a new view of fertilization too. This is what the egg looks like during fertilization. Now, then I always had a thought that it's the sperm goes in and one lucky one makes it. Well, that's kind of okay, and they penetrate the egg, but it's really the egg allows them in. The egg feels the sperms and creates some changes in the carbohydrate structure of the outside of the egg, and the egg lets in the sperm. But so it sort of looks more like my first attempt at making soba noodles. It's kind of a mess, But let's look here, contrast this with a Viagra commercial by Pfizer, which shows that one very strong, big sperm penetrating the egg, master of the universe, it looks like, It's this inaccurate, forceful penetration is not what happens. This is what happens, Sorry, guys, It's sort of a mess in there. But this version by Pfizer is probably better than what my father, the sex educator, taught us, which looked more like this. The more I've learned about sex, the more I realized that I had been given a very skewed version of it. There's a standard North American cultural view that's really quite incorrect. It's a dichotomous. It says that there's two sexes, male and female, and there's two gender roles, and there's two orientations, heterosexual and homosexual. And this is just a cultural construct. It doesn't have a lot of accuracy. The reality is that there's a wide variety, lots of diversity, and it's more flexible. We can have sex with the same sex and not be gay, and vice versa. It's both fluid and fixed. It is kind of determined by our biology and our genetics and our chemistry, our body, but also able to be influenced by our culture. And our cultural influence can affect our biology, which in turn affects things. So it's quite interesting. I like the genderbread person view that Sam Kellerman put out of that he looks at. You can Google this and you can print out these posters for working with people. You can see that you start taking like gender identity, and you can range a person to put themselves how womanly or manly they feel. Their gender expression, without a gender, or masculine and feminine, biological, and everybody has their own unique construct of how those different things, the variations of those different fields. I think one of the biggest amazing things that's happened in my lifetime is seeing the acceptance of same-sex orientation, and the recent Supreme Court decision is just pretty spectacular. And the renewed focus that gays and lesbians and people transgendered are giving us in terms of are giving everybody, or their contribution for everyone, not us, but contribution just all around, is the idea of the importance of the pair bonding and having that recognized and validated, and how special that can be. There's a chemistry of sex that goes on within the body, realizing how I learned a lot about how multifaceted that is. Just on a chemical level, there's dopamines, endorphins, the feel-good chemicals, serotonin, opiate release, prolactins, and vasopressins, and oxytocin bonding hormones. They all kick in and are related to a person's sexuality. And sexual orientation and gender can be affected too with different levels of different hormone. There are different places in the body that produce the hormones. We have multiple places for production of sex hormones. There's an interplay between the thoughts and a person's health and behavior, and those can influence emotions and sensations. And if one area fails in the body, sometimes other areas pick up in order to keep the person sexually active and sexual. Now we'll look at some microphotography. This is photomyography, which is even closer than the microphotography. This is a picture of a slide of the crystals, I guess, that are related to estrogen. Estrogen is been associated as the female hormone. It's very important in terms of the tissues and how plump those are with to allow for blood flow. I've seen pictures where women's cross-section of the cells of women's bodies, of their vaginal tissues, if they don't have enough estrogen, and it can look like a tree in wintertime. But when the estrogen is added, you have more branches and more, it gets richer and fuller. And so you can imagine without that estrogen, sensation is going to be a lot less. Males produce estrogen. Estrogen is important to male sexuality as well. And we have testosterone, which has been associated as the hormone of desire, and it also relates to fantasy levels as well as aggression and irritability. And these levels, the variation, the amount of estrogen to testosterone can change and fluctuate during a person's life. Women tend to get a little bit, even though we have more estrogen and less testosterone, we have actually 20 to 40 times, males have 20 to 40 times the amount of testosterone in their bodies than women. That's a lot more. But the ratios of testosterone and estrogen can change in ways where women start getting a little testier as they get older. No, I'm not going to do that, And males can get a little bit more nurturing because the ratio of their estrogen to testosterone can shift towards estrogen a little bit as they get older. In comparative. I just added this one of progesterone just because it's so beautiful. Isn't that amazing? This is a hormone related to pregnancy, menstruation. It can affect same-sex attraction, serotonin, and it comes up with addiction. I don't know enough, but I came up with that in my research, that the progesterone and addiction. But one of them that I really am wild about is oxytocin. It's been called the love hormone. It's also been called the moral hormone because it increases feelings of empathy towards other people. But oxytocin is released before sex, leading up to sexual interaction, from touch and stroking, as well as during sex and after sex, the cuddling. And it can be important for stimulating, or cuddling will stimulate it for arousal. It can increase skin sensitivity, and it plays a major role in bonding and expressing and receiving love. It's interesting that oxytocin, studies have been done on autistic children, and they have lower levels of oxytocin than other kids. It's curious. The oxytocin production can be inhibited by increased testosterone and by stress. Okay, so you're thinking, if doing a lot of porn increases testosterone, or, you know, even just a lot of aggressive kind of things, that can make it more difficult for people with its increased testosterone perhaps to bond in relationships. And, I did a lot of learning about I love the whole monkey thing, okay, so bear with me. But it's just, if you look at the chromosomes, and our closest other species that humans are related to are apes and other primates. And we have the most in common with them. These are pictures of bonobo apes. They're also called they've been called pygmy chimps. They're smaller than chimps, and they're amazing. They smile, full smiles. They have an incredible sex lives where sex is really important for social bonding. They do sex like we do handshakes a lot all the time. They're pansexual. There's a genital rubbing between females that goes on, sex play between males. You have sex is a way they kind of comfort and reassure each other and connect with each other. And they have absolutely no sexual violence. I spoke with Franz de Waal, who's the main researcher on bonobos, and he shared that with me. We also have, these are our oldest, our closest cousins or whatever. We're as close to them as we are to regular chimpanzees. And it's assumed we all had a common ancestor about 6 million years ago. That's an awfully long time ago. But just in looking at them, you can see that there might be something in us that has this capacity then God, can develop. Because this looks very similar to human connections. They also have front-tilting genitals, and can have face-to-face heterosexual and homosexual interactions. But gorillas and orangutans also have these front tilting. So if you thought that we were unique in having face-to-face or missionary sex, that's not true. There are other species that do. Franz says, the bonobos show us that non-reproductive sex is very common in our lineage and probably natural in our species as well. People who claim sex is intended only for reproduction don't have any support if you consider the rest of the primates and the bonobos in particular. The bonobos have a female-dominant society. By comparison, chimps they're usually not violent, but they can be very violent, and they can do infanticide, they can kill babies in order to get females from another male. It's a male-dominant culture, and Franz says chimps use violence to get sex, while bonobos use sex to avoid violence. And while chimps victimize each other in many ways, rape, murder, infanticide, warfare between groups, there's never been a single observed case of any of these forms of aggression among bonobos, who are much more sexually diverse and active than chimps. In chimps, females will rally together to rescue another female. There's not a lot of, the sexual violence, sometimes Franz said that males will pull a female away. But females will rally together to rescue her. And I think I got some of those genes. And maybe a lot of other people can relate with that. So to me this says we have the capability, and this has been shared by others before too, of taking our sexuality in violent ways, in aggressive ways, as well as in love-based or bonding and caring and empathy ways. Wow. We can, and the difference in that is a lot what we're presented by our culture, how our culture shapes our sexuality. This is a figure of the Anne Saki figurine. It's the oldest known sculpture of a couple making love. It's 11,000 years old. And so you can see that, we're one of the, there are a number of pair bonding primates where they can bond for life. We have that capacity to pair bond. And, I could go on about the importance of that, but here's a picture of the oldest recorded gay couple. This is from 4,400 years ago. These were two male royal manicurists, and they shared a tomb similar in the way heterosexual married couples were often buried. Their epitaph reads, "Joined in life, joined in death." And so this is, okay, there's so much to cover, and I'm going to need to go through this pretty quickly because I will go over a little bit because we started a little bit late, but the sex is a full body experience. Sight, sound, taste, skin, movement, breath, pulse, and smell are all involved in human-to-human sexual behavior. There's a dynamic loop and learning process that goes on with what's happening in our brains, what's happening in our genitals, our emotions, hormones, senses, the relationship, our thoughts, our fantasies, and all of those can get wired together and reinforced through the pleasure of the orgasm or the sexual arousal. And as they're reinforced, it becomes an easy way, a patterned, easy way to experience sexual interaction. And that's part of the problem in terms of today's pornography and other sexual media, because for young people, it's a lot of matter of who gets there first to start making a pattern, arousal pattern, and what gets there first. What are because those early associations can be changed, but as you know, it can be very difficult to do that. The more positive other conditioning that was there to start, the easier it is. And so in the same way we are what we eat, we are sexually what we condition ourselves to be. And Marnia Robinson has helped enlighten me about the importance of conditioning. If we look at our culture does, the cultural influences are huge. We get certain ideas of what it means to be a sexual person, how we need to look, and there's a ton of difference in different cultures throughout the world. We don't have time to go into that, but things like rights and privacy and regulating behavior and attitudes are all culturally determined. Traditional culture imposes on us a sense of, how attractive we are and our worth sexually. Our sexuality is constantly getting shaped, defined, and controlled by the culture and the times we live in. Cultures can teach us to curb sexual aggressive tendencies or to exaggerate and express those aggressive tendencies. My work and research has led me to, has also exposed me to the very serious problems that go on: lack of sex education, STIs, unwanted pregnancy, compulsive behavior, dysfunction and injury, and there's increased sexual injuries happening now due to rough sex, gay rights, Female genital mutilation, 125 million girls and women are affected by female genital mutilation today. That's a lot. And 2 million experience unnecessary vaginal fistulas, which is a tearing of the vagina because they had, which could have been repaired through medical intervention. Sexual assault and abuse are high, and prostitution, sex slavery, sex trafficking, lack of sexual health care and therapy. As a young, as a sex therapist over the years, I've specialized in sexual abuse, recovery and healing, helping survivors. And I noticed that sexual abuse, that sexual abuse survivors and victims responded differently to sex therapy. They couldn't do a lot of the standard traditional sex therapy exercises. They were too sexual too soon. And that got me wanting to write books and develop interventions that could help this population. And I found the stories very sad. I also found it sad how the culture even was supporting sexual violence and continued to support that, and how there was a backlash to working with survivors to help them heal. My own office was picketed by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which was a bogus syndrome, and an organization based a lot by sex predators, I think. But anyway, that was a long time ago. It terrified me. I remember being pregnant and having threats coming in the mail from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation for just speaking out about sexual abuse and sharing information of how to identify survivors that was accused of implanting false memories. In sexual abuse, sex is a weapon as well as a target, and sexual abuse is an attack on a person's sexuality. I also became aware of how partners of sexual abuse survivors are affected, and the feeling bad about themselves. And its picture is, it's sort of like if the abuse happens like a stone being thrown in the water, the ripples can take years to come up to the shore, and that's when they affect a partner. But the partner can't do anything to stop the abuse. It's a very difficult position to be in. I realized that a lot of the dysfunctions people had were functional. That difficulty having an orgasm, let's say, for a survivor could be related to not the orgasm being associated with the abuse memory. I also learned a lot about sex addiction and compulsive sexual behavior. That was my book, one of the old ones of Patrick's. I think he had one before that called just Understanding Sexual Addiction. That was an earlier version of this too, and then changed the title. And I realized that sexual addiction it's an addiction not to healthy sexuality. It's an addiction to a certain type of sex that generates shame and creates negative consequences. I think that's an important distinction. I saw the benefit of 12-step programs and learned a lot about other types of therapy and the pain that the partners go through in terms of being secondarily being traumatized themselves. It's the finding out that the dishonesty and the lies, and also finding out that you don't matter like you thought you mattered to the other person. And that their sexual acting out is more important than the love you have to give. Very hard thing. I started noticing a lot that my husband, who's also a therapist, Larry, we noticed that a lot of people came in with problems on pornography addiction, but this coincided with the internet porn coming out, and I didn't really in the earlier days as a sex therapist, I really didn't see porn as that big of a problem. It seemed like it could add a little spice to sexual relating. But then porn started to change, the way it was delivered started to change, and we just were getting all these calls every week from people saying that porn was destroying their relationships, it was destroying single people's lives and ability to form relationships. And what I realized that fueled by electronic technologies, pornography had morphed into a sexual, to have the ability to act like a sexual partner, the first sexual partner. And we know what, that can often be a very powerful connection. And a primary sex educator. For the first time in history, our sexual initiation, interests, appetites, fantasies, and behaviors are being shaped and determined by a commercially driven, profit-motivated product. Wow. That is huge. Why aren't people saying more about this? You go back to those pictures of our ape friends, and it's like, they didn't have something like this happening to them. We've got something really serious going on. I mean, it's true. It's happening in terms of our food, way we relate to food and the foods we eat, too. It's the commercialization of some of the basic human drives for profit motive can really affect people personally. I don't have time to, I'll read this actually. It's one of my favorite quotes. Naomi Wolf in the New York Magazine. If you associate orgasm with your wife, a kiss, a scent, a body, that is what over time will turn you on. If you open your focus to an endless stream of ever more transgressive images of cybersex slaves, that is what it will take to turn you on. The ubiquity of sexual images does not free eros, but dilutes it. This is like the oppression of, just being surrounded by so much sexual media. And it's degrading sexual images. It's not images about sex and, not a lot, there's some, but it's not predominantly images about sexual connection as a positive, caring, responsible activity. And nowadays you have porn morphing into things that are more aggressive and extreme and rough and degrading than ever. Oh, I'm going to share some titles. If you're sensitive to hearing words, that you might want to cover your ears during this next slide, because I'll be sharing titles that are really upsetting to me that I saw on DirecTV. This was an insert from my Sunday paper. I went on there and said, I just wonder what kind of porn titles anyone can Google, or get into on the internet. And now listen for the sex addiction and sexual abuse in these. Owned by my 12-inch black stepdaddy, not to mention the racism. Teen Sexaholics 6, that means there were other versions of this. Euro Sluts Pay Rent with Sex. Mom and Dad Seduce the Babysitter. This is standard. This is mainstream porn. We're not talking about Gonzo. This is mainstream, everyday porn through DirecTV. Porn makes sexism, racism, sexual abuse, and sexual addiction look sexy. There's a whole thing going on, too, where this is Jennifer Johnson's work, where she's plotted out the red are the porn websites and the blue are mainstream, and the gray are the hubs, Hustler, private media groups, Playboy, and they're all in bed with each other. They and she's shown how you can start on the outside, going into even something like ESPN, and get sort of sucked into from one site to another with pop-ups and ads and things, into the heavy-duty porn, which is extreme porn, aggressive porn, child porn, the things that make money. And this is what kids are learning. It's very, very sad to me. Thinking this is what I think what sex is. I think we're forfeiting their health for this commercial product, and it's really upsetting me because of that fairness thing. This is so unfair. Sex is so good, and it's being contaminated with this product and these greed-hungry corporate interests, or just people. And there are, I see porn as the great sex spoiler. And in many ways, with this background in sexual abuse healing and my work as a feminist, I feel kind of defeated, to tell you the truth, by what's going on now. It's just like this is a bigger wave than we can easily change. I know it will be changed over, but I think there are a lot of people who are going to give up their healthy sexuality before we start turning things around. The Norton Online survey showed that porn was the number 4th most Googled word for children 7 and under. It's like, huh? This was from a study in 2009. And just the stories of it were so upsetting to hear. Sad stories. One, a client, this is not a picture of him, course, but we'll say his name is Rick. He was exposed to child porn and extreme porn at 13. He masturbated to it and then went into the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror and says, I must be a pedophile, I must be a sexual predator. And even though he only did it a couple times more, his whole adolescence was this fear of being caught and the fear that he was perverted, and it affected all his relationships. He wanted to become a teacher, but he didn't tell people, he didn't get help till he was in his 20s. And he told me, you only get one shot at being an innocent person. Once seen, something can't be unseen. Porn took me so far out from what sex really is. And a female, I don't have time to go into her story here, but it was a lot about how she ended up on BDSM sites at age 11 and playing the submissive, and with some pretty nasty interactions. And she's in her 30s, wants a family and children of her own, but feels she can't do it because she's scared of sexual intimacy, and she has only negative associations with it. And she says she feels like a freak, and is very anxious if somebody finds her attractive. And she's an attractive woman. So a lot of the sex and relationship things that are learned in porn are not helpful to real relationships. Things like keep your distance and stay in control. There's always more. You can never have enough. Anyone and anything can arouse you. Your satisfaction matters most. People will sexually service other people. That's what they're there for. Sexual satisfaction doesn't require caring or meaningful human contact. So there's a lot of interaction between porn and, sexual addiction and sexual abuse. I see sexual harm. They're both forms of sexual harm. It's anything that violates the right to learn and experience healthy sexuality. And it creates a dynamic of victims and perpetrators in both, too. You have similarities. Sex is for power, a commodity. People are objects. They don't have rights. There's a betrayal, no boundaries. It's self-centered, lacks empathy. There's a loss of control and choice. It's impulsive. It ignores negative consequences. It results in anxiety, depression, and shame, isolation, fear, injury, pain, loss, self-disgust, and sexual dysfunction. There's harm to others, and present or future partners, family and community, and for both sexual addiction and sexual abuse, there seems this bizarre denial of them as serious problems. Our sexuality is so important to who we are. They can support each other, one can lead to the other, one can fuel the other, one can desensitize to the other. And so let's go on to sexual healing. So sexual healing involves making up for developmental losses, not getting those key developmental things that would have been great to have gotten, that I talked about earlier, and reclaiming your right to healthy, deeply satisfying, socially responsible sexuality. There's some common sexual healing steps. Being able to view the sexual problem in its socio-cultural context. I put that first. That's pretty interesting, right? I think that is the whole thing, because people's shame and embarrassment, and they can go like that young gentleman I spoke about who had looked at the child porn and thought he was a perpetrator. It's that people can go for years if they don't have this piece of what's going on in terms of the society. Just like people with obesity problems can blame themselves for eating too much and not realize the chemicals that are in our food and the types of foods that are presented and the way our appetites have been distorted by the foods we're given. So putting the problem in a socio-cultural context takes people away from feeling that blaming themselves, they can realize they're not alone. Seek help, get understanding and support, work on changing sexual attitudes and self-concept, stop harmful sexual behaviors, of course. You have to stop the old to be able to make room for the new, develop and heal intimate relationships, recondition arousal to positive conditions, because conditioning was a key here in forming the problems. There has to be conditioning to change the sexuality. That means that new thoughts about sexuality and new fantasies, new ideas and experiences need to be conditioned with sexual pleasure. And then learning new approaches to touch and sex, address sexual fantasy and functioning concerns. I did a whole presentation yesterday on healing unwanted sexual fantasies. There's a lot there. So, I'll just review a few key things here, or mention a few key things. This is from my healthysex.com website. I have lots of information on what is healthy sex, and helping people to learn about it. There are free posters on my website. Do you know the difference between porn-related sex and healthy sex? Some hazards of porn. This is sort of like when you get a prescription and it comes with information of, the cautions. This would be the cautionary insert to porn or whatever. How it can create social isolation, mood disorders, lots of negative problems. I encourage people to also go to this website, the World Sexology Organization, and download this Declaration of Sexual Rights, because it can give you a global perspective on important features in promoting healthy sexuality. People, we all, whether we have sexual addiction, abuse histories or not, we need to be able to take charge of our own sexual conditioning, to make healthy sexual media choices, and to develop a healthy sex-positive erotic imagination. I often will say, you've got your head, you got your heart, and you got your genitals. The important thing is to get them lined up. In porn, you have your eyes, which are your central nervous system popping out of your head. Your eyes connected to your genitals responding. It's like you missed the whole heart piece, right? And you got to be able to have those all lined up and integrated. I encourage people to strengthen courtship skills, because that can be this, it teaches us, they've been developed for millions of years, where humans will start with like a shoulder touch or hands. There's a lot of the things that go on when you just first touch a partner in ballroom dancing. That's how I remember the different steps to courtship. The genitals don't come together, till like at the very end. A slow, safe, progressive steps develop, and you learn attunement and how to pattern and respond to a partner, and do behaviors in harmony with each other, in conjunction with each other. You need to be able to open to present-centered, full-body sensuality that involves all the senses. There are exercises in both the Sexual Healing Journey, my book for survivors, and the Porn Trap, the one Larry and I did for people with porn porn problems. There's a whole chapter on relearning touch and approaches to sex that does involve how to connect the heart, things like heart anchoring, or if you can imagine an exercise where a person just places their hand on their heart and their hand over their genitals. They can have their clothes on, but just breathe, connecting both and thinking positive thoughts like, wow, my genitals are good. They really serve me well in terms of the different functions and things like this. Just something that simple of bringing the genitals into a loop. This is the hand-to-heart exercise, where you learn to breathe, relax, stay present, communicate, express love, and have fun. That touch is about that. And it takes time for this learning to occur. It's because it was conditioned through an experiential conditioning to get to the problem. You have to have experiential conditioning to solve it and to create new patterns. I'm pleased to announce that in celebration of my retirement, as well as these videos were getting kind of old, I look like a teenager. One of them, I have recently put both videos on healthysex.com for free. No longer have. Yeah, it used to be like $40 or $50. And you don't have to worry about pop-ups coming like on the YouTube. You can watch it if you watch it from the website. I'll tell you a little about to wind up here. When Larry and I were doing the book on the porn trap, we interviewed quite a number of people who had recovered from porn, and one was this gentleman who had used porn very compulsively. He even had written some porn and used it with drugs, and he crashed from using it, and but eventually picked up and got himself up and got into recovery. But here's what he says about how he feels after recovery and getting porn out of his life. I'm more of a human being than I ever was when I was using pornography. I am present and much less detached from other people. I feel more of a complete adult because I'm not sexually objectifying other people and things anymore. I'm alive with my current partner in a way I was never alive before when I was intimately involved with a woman. Now, free from porn, I feel like I've been given a wonderful gift, not just of my own consciousness, but of my own humanity. And I've also often used the expression, when you reclaim your sexuality, you reclaim your full self. So I invite you to stay connected with me. I have a Facebook page, and come talk with me if I can answer questions for you later. I wish you the best. You're my heroes.